First of all, I'd like to say welcome to Memorial and Zion Church. We are hosting a film that most of us have already seen, and then now we're bringing in hopefully that some of you will be for the first time. And I am your host, happen to be the chairman this year for the church, and here I have the co-chair or the assistant, Ozzy Moorhead here. He's the right hand.
What are we?
And then Clayton Wiley is a former chair, and he will be moderating and helping with this. So I hope that you enjoy what's been put out for you, and I hope that this is enough information to give us all something to think about, good, bad, or indifferent. And I hope that everybody have an open mind and that we hold our opinions to be worthy and not so constructive, so that, and I do believe in time, so that we can do whatever we need to do or say and see, but I don't expect us to be here all night. Okay? Clayton? Thank you.
With that said, I'm giving you real quickly, this is the itinerary or agenda for tonight. I would like for each one of you to introduce yourselves. Followed by that, we will have a presentation by Jason. He'll give you a presentation, a Q&A, and then we will talk about a path forward. Okay, we will call in on this and decide to be host in regards to the initial concept. It could have some positive impact on our church, and so we were asked that we could get other churches involved, and that's what this meeting is all about, as well as the community at large. As I said, repeat, have each one of you introduce yourselves, and who you, which agency or which church or whatever your affiliation may be. Then we will have a video presentation, slide presentation, whatever we want to call it, Q&A, and then talk about path forward. Where should we go from here? Okay. That's what with you, sir.
It's Jose DaCosta. I'm affiliated with Tina Chapman DaCosta, resident of 21 Atkinson Street. I produce Exodus to Jazz concert series.
Hi, I'm Tina Chapman DaCosta, and I'm also a resident of Cornhill, and I'm a member of Mount Olivet Baptist Church up the street. And I produced a film called Remembering the Fifth Eye, which was a documentary about the Fifth Eye Jazz Club, and I've met several people regarding that. And also I'm a member of Cornhill, so I have attended the Cornhill Association board meetings.
Hi, Nick Tamburini. I'm also a Cornhill resident, past president of the Cornhill Neighborhood Association, and involved with the community development outreach. So, interested to see the presentation.
Ozzy Moorhead, trustee on the trustee board of Memorial Amen Zion Church.
Drew Walker, Memorial.
Scott Williams, Cornhill Neighbors Association, 10-year resident down on the old section of South Fitzhugh Street.
And Scott is the chair of our Vision Plan Committee.
That too.
Rob Goodling, Cornhill Neighbors Association, 32-year member of the neighborhood.
I'm Larry Francer. I'm the Associate Director of Preservation at the Landmark Society.
My name is Jim DeVenny. I'm a pretty new resident here. I just moved in the end of July, and I've discovered that the Cornhill Neighborhood Association works fast. They've already appointed me as the historian of Cornhill. And I would love to see your film because in my earlier life I was a documentary filmmaker and worked on a series called Eyes on the Prize about the history of the civil rights movement. So,
Oh, I've seen. I didn't know that recollection. Yeah.
oh, that warms my heart right there.
Yeah.
I love you forever.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Sir. We know him. Introduce him.
Hi, I'm Berta Day. I'm trustee chair of First Church of God down the street.
Her sidekick. Mine.
I'm with her.
No, you can't use that one.
Again, I'm Roy Burton, trustee here at Memorial and Zion already about to speak.
My name is Manuel Longstreet. I'm a member of the board of
from the Flying Squirrels.
Ricardo Evans, Flying Squirrel.
My name is Ted Forsyth. I'm a resident of Cornhill on Atkinson Street. I'm also a Flying Squirrel member, and I'm taping tonight on behalf of Rochester Media. There are a lot of our members in our organization that wanted to come to this but couldn't, so we want to make this available for people so they can see it on their own time.
Hello, I'm Alex Smith. I'm also a trustee.
And Andy Dillon, the Flying Squirrel Community Space.
No, Phyllis Carter, Exchange Legal. Vanessa Singer, Hallelujah Teas, Hallelujah Bed and Breakfast as well, right here on Mercer Street. I attend the original elementary schools. I've been here for a while. My mother, she attended here, Juanita Washington, before she passed. Church brings back a lot of memories. She was a historian for the Association. Excited to see all that they put together.
I'm Richard Blank. I live in Cornhill on Bridge Street. I'm also the editor of the Cornhill Gazette, which is the neighborhood newspaper.
I'd like to thank you all. I think we've got a diverse group here, and the community as a whole is well represented. And now we'll proceed. Jason is going to take us through the presentation, and we'll follow that with a question and answer.
I'm going to get started. My name is Jason Streb. I'm an architectural designer from Clark Patterson Lee, who's headquartered here in Rochester. Really excited and honored to be presenting this specific project in this specific church. One of the real joys of this project for me personally as an architect was I got to do a lot of historical research. It's not an in-depth research, as you'll come to find out through the presentation, but it was one where I got to connect back with Rochester. I'm a Rochester resident myself, so it was a real honor. It's a real honor being here to present the project for you all as well. So this project, and we're lucky to have Larry here tonight in attendance, we worked really closely on this, was a joint effort between the Landmark Society here in Cornhill and then Clark Patterson Lee, my firm, working on the design. Caitlin, and I'm going to butcher her last name, Midas. Perfect. There we go. And Larry worked out of Landmark, and I'm going to give you a brief history of the project. Hopefully Larry can interject with some important tidbits. I was the lead designer on the project. I put this in at the last presentation because of my age. I wanted to let people know I do know what I'm talking about. I was named the Emerging Architect of the Year in Rochester in 2013, and also the New York State Associate Architect of the Year that same year. Part of my college thesis project was working on revitalizing economically challenged neighborhoods, coming up with new urban strategies for that as a way to revitalize and kind of regrow the city. So this project was right up my alley. The background was this was part of the 75th anniversary initiative for Landmark. You see here it's at the top, the Landmark Corridor Study, which I'm about to present to you. The 5 to Revive, the Preservation Grant Fund, and an online educational program were all kind of in that realm for Landmark as part of their 75th anniversary initiative. The goal was to identify little-known or non-traditional sites associated with the African American community, and how it was described to me by Larry and Caitlin throughout the process was, we want to highlight the rich history that we have here in Rochester beyond maybe the Frederick Douglass. Beyond some of the really more well-known names that we celebrated more specifically, and look at communities at large, maybe not specific people. And then from those areas that they had targeted, develop strategies for economic development and revitalization. They received $50,000 in funding from the Regional Economic Development Council by the state to do the study. From this, they developed the task force, and Larry, I don't know if you want to just quickly touch upon this, as this was before my involvement with the project.
Sure. We got a group of people together
community leaders. There were some politicians as well involved. And we did some listening sessions where we went out to the community and just sat down with a group of people and asked them what was important to them. And we did it in 3 different quadrants and brought the information back and worked with the committee once again to just decide which were the ones that we could identify as the priority neighborhoods and sites.
So from those listening sessions, hearing from the community members, like Larry mentioned, 6 sites were targeted for areas of study and intervention. You're seeing the 6 that were selected here: the Joseph Avenue corridor, the South Plymouth Avenue corridor, the Plex neighborhood, Clarissa Street here in Cornhill, the site of the former Ham House, the Frederick Douglass Sprague House on Hamilton Street, and the area of Mumford, Caledonia, which actually has a very unique, really interesting, rich history for the African American community. We're only going to talk about the Clarissa Street portion today for obvious reasons. Throughout the project, Clarissa Street in Cornhill and the Plex neighborhood stood out as having the most content based on what we were trying to achieve. As we looked into the study and worked back and forth with Landmark, it seemed like these 2 areas, both geographically, were related similarly, and then historically had a lot of similar overlap in histories. So the task of, as Landmark put out an RFP to various firms throughout the region to work on the project, was to do a windshield survey of important architectural structures in the corridor, suggestions on how to possibly brand the corridor if it was appropriate, suggestions on streetscaping improvements to complement the architectural and other aesthetic features. And it's from here that we submitted and were selected to work on the design henceforth. So now here's my portion of the design. I do want to do just a quick disclaimer because we've presented the project before and it's gotten some people confused. These are all just conceptual ideas. As I mentioned before, it started off with historical research with Landmark Society. Cynthia Howe was instrumental in helping me with that. But it's really about looking at these areas, looking at their rich histories for the African American community, and then trying to come up with unique ways beyond just a historical marker on a site that not only provides some kind of content and relevance back to that neighborhood, highlights the history, and then potentially could do something to springboard some sort of economic development. So what you're going to see here are really conceptual-based designs. Part of any project that a designer would work on, and especially this one, it needs to come from the citizens if it was to move forward. This is what we call kind of working in a vacuum. So these are solely the ideas of a couple designers working with historians, doing kind of analysis. The next step, if this was to be a project, it would have to come from you. So these are just ideas of jumping board, springboard type elements. The sites selected still need study on feasibility, viability, and of course the people that own certain sites would need to have buy-in. So keep that in mind as you see some of these images and concepts. They're just that, they're concepts. So just an overview, it might be tough to see. A study on historical elements, existing conditions, and conceptual design through the lens of economic and neighborhood development. I start the presentation with this quote because I feel it's very relevant for how we went after this project. So it's history is a clock that people use to tell their time of day. It is a compass they use to find themselves on the map of human geography. It tells them where they are and what they are. So my line was working forward with this, and with Clarissa Street and Cornhill in general being in a really well-established neighborhood, the branding component as a neighborhood in general didn't seem to stand out to me. But in general, we wanted to work within the neighborhood's existing initiatives. We wanted to highlight African American history in a way that encouraged or promote branding, or more specifically for Clarissa Street, and identity. And then we wanted to highlight African American history in a way that also encouraged economic growth or potentially future development. The other lens we looked through was providing neighborhood amenities through this kind of historical highlight. So to provide impactful signage or streetscape elements that highlight the history. Provide impactful signage elements that serve the neighborhood's basic needs. And then provide essential elements for neighborhood enhancement, lighting, safety, art, other beautification techniques. This is just a graphic to kind of show you the project overview in terms of location in and around the city of where we looked at the sites. I've put up just a really quick timeline historically for Clarissa Street. When I first started the research, this neighborhood stood out so much to me, and as a designer, my whole goal is to research and read and try to pull elements of the history that occurred on the street that I can then use to do kind of a physical manifestation or something that's going to really respectfully highlight that way. And you're going to hear me say impactful a lot because I wanted these interventions to be just that, impactful. As you can see, dating back to the early 1800s, as when this neighborhood was really established as an African-American community way back when, it came to me, I was really excited. I thought, wow, there's so much to choose from. I'm not going to have any problem. This is just a visual overview again. A lot of you live here, have grown up here, worship here, so you're familiar with the area. As a designer, when we look at beginning strategies, we'll combine our historical research, and we'll also combine an analysis of the neighborhood, its street layouts, its traffic flows, where buildings are located. So that was really an initial study as an architect and as a designer to find where are the major intersections, and you see them highlighted there, and where are the minor intersections. So how does this street function currently today? We looked at major traffic flow. One of the things that we noticed with Clarissa Street in general was that there was really nothing to grab you or draw your attention at all for any pedestrian or someone driving by car, that this neighborhood has so much history, that this street has so much history. There was nothing really to grab you. So at these intersections, that seemed to be a way that we wanted to pull people's attention. Another thing that really stood out in the neighborhood, as I'm sure you're all well aware, we analyzed green spaces versus parking surfaces, wide open areas. Historically, this street was a commercial corridor. It was lined with buildings, it was lined with black-owned businesses and shops, and it was full of life. And through urban renewal, a lot of that had been taken away. So it was really quite shocking to see former maps and some photos of this street and realize that so much of it is gone. And that'll come into play when we talk about how we decided to do interventions. So taking all of that into play, we focused really on zones of work, or how we could kind of focus the interventions. We'll talk about Zone 1, which is kind of the north terminus of the street currently. And then we'll talk about some intermediate zones, mainly those kind of intersections where we wanted to have people stop and take notice of the street specifically. And then Zone 2, which runs right next to the church here, and we've kind of come up with a really, what we think is a fun, respectful way to memorialize the street. So I brought just to show you my process, and this doesn't include drawings, but I have binders and notebooks full of drawings, sketches, historical research, maps, stories. I viewed your documentary big time, and you'll see it come into play. And again, really brief, really surface scratching of what can I take to then pull into something. I mentioned before I was really excited about the history of the street. There was so much to pull from. When I looked back at the street and analyzed, and when I realized so much of the street was gone, it became the most difficult of the neighborhoods to actually do an intervention. We didn't want to brand it because it's in Cornhill. Didn't think it was necessarily worth a complete rebranding since it sat in the neighborhood. There was not a ton of historically relevant building structures that we could call upon that we might want to repair and rehab like we could in other neighborhoods. So it became really, really difficult to come up with an intervention, a way to highlight this history physically when so much of it is gone. I pull up my notes here that I did when I did my historical research because I was reading through it today, and I actually found this little note at the bottom where I started, and it says Black churches, center of social action and progress. Zion Church equals huge. This church, its history, was so strong when I did that research. So again, I'm honored to be here presenting to you that. Okay, so let's get into the concepts a little bit. I talked to you that so much of the street's character, its streetscape, its street edge, something that defines the street like a typical city street, was gone. One of the ways we can do that, to redefine, is to establishing that edge visually. Pavers are a really great way to do that. You'll hear the beginning part of this. I talk a lot about the jazz era, the jazz clubs. These pavers specifically speak to me as a kind of wooden floor look, a jazz club floor. So we wanted to use these pavers to line the street, and you'll see in the slides what that would look like. But something that's fun, something that's unique. Again, we want it to be impactful. Uniqueness is important, especially in neighborhoods like these, to stand out, to get people to stop. So pavers was an element that we were going to use to define the street edge, very simply. We talked about those intersections, not having much character or any need to stop. A really easy way to do that is to invoke some artwork and some life into those crosswalks. So you'll notice it's done in other parts of the country, it's done all over the world, where they have artists paint these kind of crosswalk markers. It does two things. It provides safety when pedestrians are crossing the street, because visually for cars they're coming up to something. And it also helps to do that identity branding that we talked about. So specifically with the jazz era, the keyboard or some sort of musical notes at these crosswalks seemed relevant and important, again, fun and unique. So here's an image of an existing intersection. This is at Adams and Clarissa. Here's a quick sketch of just what that intervention might look like with a painted crosswalk. Potentially at open corners, you could define it with some signage, defining that street edge, calling people's attention. Simple elements like banners. Color, I find, is a really great way to infuse an identity or branding, so you'll see a lot of red in this, just a color I thought was appropriate. But you'll see it starts to develop character, it starts to get this stop. Here's that same intersection from another angle. And again, what its intervention might look like. These, again, early sketches, really quick, really easy kind of urban interventions that can be done. This sketch is showing that plank paver defining the street edge. The one thing when we were going over this and designing it and using the pavers to define the street edge was that it could potentially become areas where flowers sprung out of open portions of that paver system, where memorial placards could be, and they would be colorized red. Street signs could have a different color of red. And similarly to the High Line in New York, how that street edge paver system can start to become other things. It starts to become benches for the street, people waiting for bus stops, things like that. So I had mentioned that so much of the street, so much of its physical character had been demolished, removed, kind of washed away in the 60s and early 70s. So our design intention became less on physically building, and it became, well, what do we have left in this neighborhood? What has always stood the test of time? And for us as designers looking at this neighborhood, the street itself is still there. The memories reside in the street. So instead of looking up and around, we wanted to force people to look down at the street. So the interventions that we have are trying to play on that. In that realm, we wanted to memorialize the street. It has so much character, it has so much history. That stuff will never go away. We're not necessarily calling for a massive development, build, and boom to recreate what it once was. I think that's a little irresponsible for a designer at some point. So we wanted to memorialize certain elements of your history on the street, certain elements of the African American history. So these are just some examples of different memorials that you're seeing. The Thought Club stood out in some of our research to have a really strong historical presence for those that were part of this era, that went to the club. It had a connection with people. It wasn't necessarily the nicest club, but it had an energy, it had a vibe, it had a character that the residents or anyone who went there could feel. So we want to recreate that. Again, we want to have impactful interventions. So how do we highlight the history of the jazz club era? We're going to memorialize the Fifth Odd Club, or for any jazz club for that matter. We've located it next to Flying Squirrel, mainly because of its location on that north terminus, because of its location to an organization that's community-based and could benefit dually from this memorial or park, if you will. And so you're seeing just a little diagram of an image here of the surfaces that we wanted to try to capitalize on or utilize for this memorial. The blank side of the building, certainly the surface area on the ground, and then again the sidewalk as well, drawing the eye downward towards the street. Here's just some sketches. I always find it important so you guys see process that we're coming up with this. It's still loose, it's still ideas of what the club could be, or what the memorial would be. And you're seeing quick sketches here. So this is a better image. The design of the Fifth Odd Memorial, our concept again was not to recreate it, but to act like it had never left, that it had actually withered away over time. So part of a powerful memorial, people always like to go see ruins. It's something that evokes memories, it's something that acts as if it stood the test of time. So in our concept, we try to recreate the footprint of the club. We would use those wood paver elements that you saw earlier to act as if the floor had kind of withered away. So you're seeing areas where the floor is missing and flowers have sprouted up. Again, we would maybe choose a red colored flower to go with the branding of the neighborhood. We would use these kind of taller elements that you're seeing almost as a way to define what the footprint of the club used to be, to act as columns. They have varying heights and they have lights at the top, and you'll see an image of that later to show what the effect that we wanted to create with that. We would line this area with chairs and tables and elements that people can use as a park to sit, to relax, so the community can use this space. On the tables, for example, we would pay honor to some of those past performers or historical figures of the jazz-specific era. We would do banners on those light poles. I'm showing Billie Holiday here, but potentially local performers or famous performers who had performed here. You're seeing a before image of what we would envision, and you're seeing a nighttime shot. We wanted the varying heights of the poles with the lights to create this kind of dizzying sense of space so that you almost felt as if you were in kind of another world, that there was really no boundaries to the space. We would imagine that the poles could potentially be playing music at night. For us, as designers, we felt that the club probably came alive at night, and so a focus for us using these light elements was that it really would be visually spectacular at night, and try to now create the sense of what it might have been in that club. We heard it described as crowded and kind of packed, and we wanted that feeling in there. It could potentially be a place where people performed too. We would, entertain an area for performance. Moving down to the southern terminus, along this church specifically, when we looked at geographically and historically the importance of this church, it made sense to do something close to the church that had relevance to the church that the church could use. Another thing we noticed when we looked at old maps was that Clarissa Street actually continued on. The Ford Street Bridge was called the Clarissa Street Bridge at one point in time, and due to urban renewal and restructuring and the changing of cities, Ford Street became the major outer ring of the neighborhood where Clarissa Street had continued down. And so, although not perfect, the one thing that was really kind of a wow factor for us was that we could kind of trace the path of Clarissa Street along the church's location here, and you'll see that in the slide. Clarissa Street was described as elm line and cobblestone. We want to try to play on that. So we're calling this memorial the Extension Memorial. We want to, again, memorialize the street. So in this memorial, we are recreating the path of the street that runs along the side of this church, and we're going to create what we're going to call a living timeline that honors the history, also is a public park next to the church for the church's use. So you're seeing a current aerial of the location that we're at right now. And you're seeing roughly the path that Clarissa Street used to take. Again, not perfect, but we're recreating that. You're seeing it lined with trees. You're seeing street lights in there. So very literally, we're recreating the visual path of the street. The street that used to take this path is no more, and we're memorializing that. Just another image of what you're seeing. If you can see the image on the left, it starts to show you that timeline infused. So as people were to walk down this street, cobblestone line, brick line, that the timeline would be imprinted or etched in the stone as you walk through. You're seeing the current view right now, the church obviously up here to the left. And with the Clarissa Street Extension Memorial, now you're seeing very visually the street superimposed with lampposts, with benches, with the living timeline that weaves throughout. Here's another image, potentially as the street could be further developed, again, conceptually. There could be statue areas, there could be areas for chess, planters, and then all the while as you're walking through here, this timeline that calls out Clarissa Street's history is kind of what we call the living timeline. You're experiencing the history as you're walking down the street's path. And that would be an image of what that could be a little more further developed. We'd want to use banner elements again, just like a typical street, that would call out. In this one, you're seeing the church on the left. You're seeing that color red, that branding element color that we've used carried throughout this. And then this little element has these kind of books or newspapers. I'm blanking, Henry Coles? Howard Coles, thank you, I'm sorry. Was such an important newspaper writer. We thought we could have a little area where either Clarissa Street stories would be etched on these books or newspapers, or it could just be an area for people to stop, sit, read a newspaper. There could be a newspaper or magazine kiosk next to that. We want the street, again, because there's not much left here currently, we wanted to reinvigorate it with the sense of what it once was. We want to activate this memorial and recreate kind of the livelihood that the street used to embody. This ties into the Plex neighborhood that we gave a presentation to directly, a couple months ago. Their strategies are very different and very unique to that neighborhood as well. So that is the Clarissa Street Memorial presentation. I guess I can open it up to questions and we can have a dialogue and go from there.
It's a reminder, as Jason had said, this was a concentration on Clarissa Street. Okay, that's not all of the conceptual ideas they had around the Cornhill area. This was on Clarissa Street. And our job, our objective tonight was to get the churches more involved in this and to take it from here to see if this concept makes sense and then where we should go from here.
It's important to note too, just before we open this up for questions, the next step from here, when we were working with Landmark, was to potentially open it up to those interested. To take the ideas that we've built as a foundation, and then if there was an interested entity or party that wanted to move forward, let's say the church with the memorial next to here, then that's the conversation we would have. And again, as I said, moving forward from there, that memorial or anything that would be done would look completely different. It would come specifically from you folks and the stories and things like that. So if the dialogue can go around that of what if and could be, I'm sure you all have a lot of history and stories to tell. Those are all stuff moving forward. If the project is to continue, we'd really like to hear. It's not continuing unless there is interest or somebody that wants to move forward in any of these cases. We've been very specific of who we presented it to. We're not looking to present it to a developer or anybody else. It's really, we're putting it out to the community members, getting their feedback, and then really going from there.
It does kind of sound like the next step is to get as many of the community members that grew up here, and basically you are kind of going through a branding process, which is good. But that's up to the community to do that, right?
Oh yeah.
Okay.
You know, we were contracted with Landmark to do a study, a conceptual study. And initially we had gone potentially for further funding of the next round from the State Economic Council. We didn't necessarily know or feel what direction we should go at because of the breadth of the study. I mean, this is just one area of the other areas I had mentioned, so there's a lot of content. Plex specifically, we had looked at doing a facade rehabilitation program as a kickoff in that area, but again, yeah, it's the next step is community-based interest, and we'll go from there.
At this point in time, then, who would be the go-to person or organization if we had a question, or we say we want to maybe help with the process? Has somebody taken the baton and said, I'll be the go-to person or organization?
Maybe not as strongly as it's my project now. Rob with the Cornhill Neighborhood Association wanted us to represent. He was at the task force presentation we gave in July. He approached us and said, can you do it again for the Neighborhood Association? We did. From that presentation that was done early November, this presentation came about. So right now, maybe the hot potatoes in Rob's hand.
Gee, thanks.
You mentioned a few times in the early part of your presentation, you were memorializing the Clarissa Street area through the lens of economic development. Now, I didn't catch the economic development piece.
And that's the tricky part. And as we presented this, people have pointed that out. The one thing that these interventions do is they benefit the neighborhood in general, the community. You're taking somewhat vacant open space, you're turning it into usable public use. The one thing in my research of urban and economic redevelopment is it's the small interventions that continue to lead to the bigger interventions. So instead of the Hail Mary pass of redevelopment, a 3-story apartment complex, it's improving the streetscape, beautifying the neighborhood, getting the community so that it's more viable potentially for future economic development building. So other neighborhoods had more of an economic component than Clarissa Street specifically, but it's a good point.
He touched on one of the points I wanted to make, but the first point I want to make is, for me, credibility is a function of specific people who provided input. So can you just list the people who were part of the task force that you mentioned? You referred to the initial task force committee.
Let's, Rob was on the task force.
Oh,
so
well,
you might be able to help, you might be able to help me with some of the names.
I wish I had brought that list.
Yeah, we should have brought that. But as I mentioned to you today, our co-chairs were Mayor Bill Johnson, former Mayor Bill Johnson, and former Brighton Supervisor Sandra Frankel. And we felt that both of them had connections, political clout, if you will. And we had lively conversations. Dr. David Anderson was very energized in terms of telling the story. That was a big thing for him. But for Mayor Johnson, it was what are we going to do economically? And so we went back and forth with that as well. We told a lot of stories. We found out it was from as minuscule a thing as a forgotten tombstone in a cemetery to that entire Caledonia Mumford community, as large as that.
Well, no, it's not so important to me what the discussions were, what was being, synthesized. It's
the personnel.
But just know who the people were that were on the committee, representing, the community.
Probably not enough. Dolores was on it.
Dolores
Jackson Radney.
And
Jackson. And Carolyn Haygood from the Landmark Society. Cynthia Howe. Right. And Richard Reesum, the historian.
Esther Krakauer was on it. She's a realtor. We had
Well, rather than take up too much time now trying to remember,
Yeah, we
if we could just make that just a follow-up,
Right.
additional information. Because like I said, it helps me understand, you know, where a lot of the things come from.
And
But
I believe in total there were about 18 people at the table.
Yeah, so that's important to know where the influences came from. But again, on the point about economic development, I mean, I'm impressed with the visuals, with the aesthetics that were presented. But I'm also saying, okay, now is there a space that presents the opportunity for developing some kind of economic vibrancy? For example, you showed the open space that is now the parking lot that used to be the Pithard, and now it's got tables and lights and so forth. But I'm thinking, wow, that would be a great space for some entertainment, for some kind of ongoing exchange that could build some kind of an economic stimulus for the community.
Well, there was supposed to be a gentleman here that, from the current owner, and I don't know if he showed up or not. Currently, owner is not in town. He doesn't reside.
Oh, you're talking about Clarissa's itself. Yeah, I haven't seen anybody from Clarissa's here. Oh, you are there? Okay. Oh, great, okay.
The current owner of the space that was the
Well, that's the Flying Squirrel.
Is the Flying Squirrel.
They aren't here.
No, it's the Flying Squirrel.
Yeah.
But I did a quick canvas of the street, and there's not a whole lot of unavailable, unoccupied space on Clarissa Street. So, and that is that concept. That property is owned. Okay, it's a parking lot for an establishment there. So, this is what we're talking concept. All of these individuals need to be kind of contacted and say, what's this concept make? The way let me just cut into this. If Memorial, I'm talking about our church, okay, if we had wanted to move forward on this, then we would look at that particular piece that dealt with Memorial, okay, and we will work on that. The issue that I have, I'm most uncomfortable with, is there's not a coordination body. Rod has taken on that responsibility, and we would know where to go forward from here. Whenever you look at something, I think of this largest, you talk about all of Clarissa Street, and there are going to be people who are going to look at this idea and say, poo-poo it. There are going to be people who say, yes, it's a good idea, but they're not going to wait. There are going to be people who say, I'm going to take some immediate action and get involved. So that's kind of where we are now. This is a concept. Wait a minute, let me finish, please. This is a concept, okay? And one of the things we need to come out of this meeting is where do we go from here, okay? One of the things I would see is that our Memorial family would need to see the part and concentrate on just what we said would be the Memorial. And you may have to look at this from an individual standpoint. But I think coming out of here, we need to talk about who's the coordinating agents of this and then come take forward and see what kind of meetings that we need from it.
I understood maybe 35 years ago that we leased this land for 99 years. There won't be anything built on that land, anything do to that land for 99 years, because we pay lease on that land for 99 years. That was the proposal I was talking for 35 years ago.
Okay, we've talked about this, and that's not an unsolvable problem. Again, I'll say this is ignored. The parcel of land in which you're talking about, we do own. The pathway there is beyond that. But we're not going to get into that kind of detail. We just want to take this kind of concept forward. Because these are unresolved problems. Okay, our pastor's not here, and so we need to take this forward, Monroe. I'm
talking about the land beyond that little path in there.
That's true.
That's the one I'm talking about, not the land here. I was told, and I was in a meeting, that we leased that land or had right to the land for 99 years. They
Yeah.
will be able to build on that land.
And the land use, the zoning would all need to be worked out moving forward with the city. That kind of stuff, that next level work is again in that next phase. So if let's say we're talking about who has ownership, who takes it, we're presenting these as ideas, as part of a project that was a concept study, and presenting it to the neighborhoods to see, well, maybe the church has interest in what we've showed, and if they wanted to move forward with a similar concept and idea, then we would take a look at, what's the viability of doing something like that. Obviously, that's a large scale, what you've seen. So we would work around that. We would try to find ways, like I said, what you see here, even if it was to move forward, would most likely not be the end product. But it hasn't gotten to that point currently.
Okay, so my question was, initially the task force covered all those study areas. You still need a task force for this one, correct? We need a separate group to get together to go forward on this. The other task force talked about all the areas, Caledonia, Mumford, all that stuff. We need a task force for this thing.
Correct.
Okay.
In your renderings, you saw a couple things with the banners. Right now, if you go down Clarissa Street right now, street lighting is like a prison yard. It's not anything that reflects the community or a sense of community. What's in the plan for that?
Well, part of the streetscaping elements moving forward, could include, better street lighting. A potential next level is getting this project, which the city has seen to a certain extent, and getting them on board. They've been having a lot of success with neighborhood projects like this. Safety is always a big item to go off of in terms of getting funding and moving forward. But currently, it's not being addressed as a street-wide project. I think it's definitely relevant.
Yeah, shouldn't it be part of your drawings? Because if somebody's going to go and twist somebody's arm and say, hey, we want a different set of lighting, and it's in your study, that gives credibility to the request to change the lighting.
Well, it could be, but that would need to be a next step as well. I mean, then the neighborhood rallies around, and then let's say they take a portion of this, and we want to move forward with the streetscaping elements of maybe the pavers and maybe the banners, and we want to include lighting in there. That's something that probably has more legs than some of the other things. But it wasn't a part of the study, not because it wasn't relevant, but it just wasn't necessarily a stronger design element that we were going to call for specifically.
Well, that's because you guys are in the office, we're on the street.
And like I said, this wasn't a vacuum. I mean, it was designed through a limited task force. The one thing about these projects is you don't want to open it up so broadly that too many hands are in the pot. That's why I keep talking about it in stages that, as an architect and designer, I'm going to look at it in step one this way. If someone has interest moving forward, it would almost 100% need to have those viable components together, but that wasn't necessarily what we were looking for.
Well, you just made me think of something else that I want to say real quick. I don't know if you read Ayn Rand's Atlas Shrugged or The Fountainhead. The Fountainhead's about the architect that decided not to work with the community, but design privately, and makes a big difference. Because in a community design effort, it's watered down. In a single design effort, they're able to really focus on some specific things and really make a unique impact. So I recommend Fountainhead. But what I wanted to say, first and foremost, is I don't know about the rest of you, but I got a little teary-eyed when you showed the Python Memorial. And I think it's because I didn't grow up in this neighborhood. I'm from somewhere else. And when I came into this neighborhood, people kept talking about the Python Jazz Room and other things with such terms of endearment that it made me want to know, well, really, what was so special about this particular club, more special than some of the clubs in New York City? And it was because it was in the neighborhood and the impact that it had within the neighborhood, and how people were able to, come together from all walks of life in that particular club and that scene, from people who were at RIT, because RIT's campus was down here, from the churches, from the other businesses, very vibrant, and a big part of that. And so that's what led me to do the documentary. But after doing that and seeing the impact from the neighborhood, and being welcomed in the Flying Squirrel and Clarissa Street Reunion and others about that, I said, gee, it'd be nice to recreate this, somehow to recreate it. And when I saw the schematic up here, I really felt like, yeah, we could be sitting there as if we were in, that club, and yeah, getting our food and everything from the Clarissa room, because it's not a real club. But then when you have the tables with the images of the artists on there who have been there, it's like, wow, this is more than I expected in terms of recreating that moment and that experience. And so I really applaud what you've put together, not just for that memorial component, but also the fact of continuing the Clarissa Street Memorial. Because Charles Price, Chuck Price, who grew up in this neighborhood, who was the first black police officer in Rochester and had this as his beat, and the first black police captain, he, as most of us know Chuck Price, and his mind is still very sharp, and he'll tell you about all that happened there. But talking about, that's the one thing he always tells me about how the street was changed, how it was cut off on the other end because of the interloop, but then also redirected and not going to the 4th Street Bridge, and how they talked about that impact. So to see that component in your design as a thoroughfare in there, I know that's something that I feel when Chuck sees that, I think he will, it'll be like bringing back memories for him. And to have people be able to walk down that pathway, I just think it would just be such a memorable event for all of us, to have that. And the fact that it was called Caledonia Avenue, it wasn't before it was called Clarissa Street. So walk down Caledonia, with what you have there. But I had always envisioned somehow recreating, these establishments that aren't there. And I think, that's a nice attempt at doing it with, at least with the picture part that I'm seeing there. And then I'll lastly just say this. You did say, that's just an idea, a concept. Who's to say it can't be set up to where you can have something that could be a performance there? Right? There could be an area set up where you could do some things and make it viably economical in terms of having events. So.
Just to show how smart I am, okay? I really accept everything my wife said. And I just want to reinforce her last comment about making it a living memorial that has some economic ongoing vitality to it, which would say that that space with the tables can become a performing arts kind of space where people come from outside the community into the community, enjoy it, then go back out, where people in the community can enjoy it and walk back to their homes, okay? So everything you said, I applaud. I'm just going to reinforce the economic potential.
One question. We put together a group of people. You're going to be on that group.
Yeah. You said you're going to be on that group?
Oh, yeah. I've just been enrolled, right?
And I just want to say, I think we have all of the components of the neighborhood, with the clubs, with the Squirrel, with the Clarissa Street Reunion, with our Neighbors Association, here at the table tonight to talk about it. And if we do move forward with all of us and the churches that are on this street, there could be a way to do this, or some of it, or something similar to it. I mean, when I first saw this, I thought when you gave it to the Landmark Society, I had a lot of doubts. We started nitpicking, with the winters we have, you can't paint those sidewalks. That'll last for 1 year. And then the more I thought about it, the more I thought, well, this just gets the juices flowing for me, and thinking about ways to do things.
And I know that economic component played very strongly into continuing the project and getting funding, and so to show the state that it does have this component to it. The conversations that Landmark and Clark Patterson had throughout this process were, what we got from Landmark's intentions, which I thought was a really interesting thing for the community, is let's do something to honor this history uniquely, impactfully, and something like we had always talked about, Larry, Caitlin, and I, beyond a placard or a marker. Those have their relevance and they're absolutely great. This project aimed to do something a little further. So yes, there should be streetlights, and yes, there should be something that spurs the development. But mainly what we wanted to pull was, what can we take that really is unique and can potentially make a difference in a neighborhood? Economically, great, because we'll probably have a better chance at funding, but more so honoring history in a really unique, interesting way, which I think Landmark, it was noble in their intentions to step outside the box a little bit and do something kind of creatively different.
Jason, could I ask John what some of your thoughts on this from the reunion? Because you represent really the strongest attempt at reliving the history of this wonderful street and what you do every year. Any thoughts that you have?
Well, you know, for the last 20 years, the Patterson Street reunion has been trying to bring back some of the attention to the viability of the neighborhood, some of the fun that we had on that street when we were kids and adults. And I'm sitting listening and hoping that somebody will jump at it and try to make something happen on that street. Like I said, we've been trying to do it in a small way. We've been bringing the music fest with 3 stages of music on that street for, like I said, 20 years. And at one time, we marked the businesses. We put signs on the street, marking all businesses up and down the street. But as our people got older, you know, people didn't have the energy to do some of that stuff. We still know them, but you know, we definitely need help.
Were there some aspects of this that you thought related to what you're trying to do as the reunion?
Yeah, if there was signage put on light poles, if there were poles lighting the street up better, identifying these areas, you know, people would understand some of what was there. Right now, they can't see it.
Yeah.
There's maybe 2 businesses on the street now. But there was 100. And a lot of people don't know that.
Like, John, you have some pictures of Clarissa Street when it was vibrant.
Yes.
And we had in the pavements, you know, the names of some of the stores and where they were positioned. That would also kind of trigger people to say, oh yeah, so-and-so, that store was right here, and just create some kind of remembrance of that vibrancy.
Correct.
That would, I think, be important to the
Well,
community.
somebody hasn't been around very long, so a lot of these businesses are gone. What happened to those pieces of property? They got absorbed by the neighboring property?
Remember the old
Turned
kind of
into
thing, yeah,
apartments,
just torn up.
or apartment buildings and, you
Yeah.
know, those townhouses.
The
One thing I wanna-
Gentleman right here, you have the floor.
Go ahead.
Yeah, initially, being honest, when I came down here, I was like, they've been planning this and nobody from the square was at the table. So I was very apprehensive about it, but I actually am quite impressed with the Clarissa, the Ryan Squirrel part of it, because we've preserved a lot of stuff from that era. We have the library, we have the store, and I can envision us doing a play or something, play acting, you know, bringing this stuff back to life, because we've been trying to do that with the Clarissa. And I said all that to say, having seen this presentation, I'm a little more open than when I came in the door tonight. You know? A lot more.
The presentation represents change, and in this day and age, in my own opinion, change is good. This type of change is good. I will say the particular presentation for that particular corner of the memorial is a good idea. That particular format, it may be of some concern to the Clarissa Room and the Finance Squirrel because of the parking that we use there. So not to say don't do a memorial, but just try to format it in a way where we can still use that for parking. If we have to only park on the street, it's gonna affect a little bit of business that's left there.
Right.
Myself, I'm from the neighborhood. I grew up in the neighborhood. Was a part of the Cornhill Festival when it was just a parade for kids. For those of you who might not know, that's what it started out as. The frat houses that were on Atkinson Street, those students started a parade for the kids for that playground that was right on Atkinson Street. I used to walk on the stilts and do the pogo stick. That's what the Cornhill Festival started out as, and look what it's grown into now. Myself now, I'm the new music director for the Clarissa Room. This is the owner's son. And he's a young guy who's trying to get that place going on his own and not having the success that he wanted to have. And now he's gone off to college, he doesn't have the time to put into the place, okay? I'm coming into as a music director. My contribution to the Cornhill, Clarissa Street area is to turn jazz back in there. I've got December pretty much booked out, and believe me, I tell you, it's gonna be 80% jazz. That's what we're going with it, okay? It's gonna be live music. Jazz is gonna get the lion's share of it. We're gonna do some redesigning on the outer area of the club. Hopefully there's some funding available for that. But the whole idea with that sidewalk plays right into what we want to do. When you show up the sketch of the piano, that's perfect. Let that run right by the club. Beautiful. Beautiful. We love that. Lighting is a big concern. It's going to benefit the Clarissa Room and the Flying Squirrel. We could use a little more lighting, honestly. So if that can come in future, come into play, that would be a great idea.
A couple more comments and questions. We're going to have to close it. Yes, sir.
I guess just to follow up and just comment about the squirrel and the thing. Did you, in your consideration, incorporate to some degree the idea of parking? Like I see that you'd like to envision that lot in the way you did, and it, it has a lot of interest. But when you were thinking about the fact that this is a lot that serves at least 2 businesses, did you in some form deal with that?
Oh, sure. And actually, I mean, the lot is huge. So to take over that entire space as that park would be massive. And as it's shown and rendered in that longer view, it's probably twice the size it really should be. For visual sake, I wanted to highlight the elements. No, and that's really, all that stuff goes into, having stakeholders that are interested in wanting to see the project move forward. We, of course, would want to design something that functions well for the owners and works well, gets the same type of conceptual idea across, but also works for the neighborhood. When we do proposals architecturally, we come up with a design in-house on our own, and we show it to clients. I never had a presentation with a client where they've seen it and said, done, perfect. I mean, it's got to be that back and forth process, because you're coming up with things that we just wouldn't think of necessarily right in the office, and so moving forward, that stuff would have to happen.
Well, my concern would be more for the church here, because you're talking tree lines here.
And I guess we're not trying to, that's something that we should talk about, and I'll give a process, but we have interest here to take this forward, but we're not trying to solve the issues of it. We know what our restraints are, okay? We need to talk about that as a church, not necessarily here, okay?
I just wanted to ask one other question in reference to your plan. Did you think of, is there a component of your plan that might impact young people? If you talk about revitalizing the area, most of us probably been here longer than we're going to be here. We need to impact young people to some extent. And I'm thinking the impact should be centered around identifying and recognizing and giving them a sense of appreciation, a contribution of their co-parent.
And I think for young people and the trend is back to urban neighborhoods, and one of the things that we tried to pull out here is that uniqueness and that sense of history, and I think it's there. It's strong here. You don't have to recreate it or fake it. So any type of intervention that highlights that history, makes the neighborhood and that street specifically a little bit more unique, I think has vibrancy for young people, my age and younger, that appreciate, the history. Cornhill's, the oldest neighborhood in the city, and it's got vibrancy in the architecture alone. So the fact that Clarissa Street, Caledonia Street, and High Street doesn't just have African American history, but has Rochester history rolled up in it, I think is the strongest part of the neighborhood, regardless of some of the interventions. So moving forward, starting small, doing things like banners or things like that, I think we'll call to that, and I think that's really what grabs people's attention.
The tree line that was for this property here, was it on that side or behind it? The sidewalks. The sidewalks.
Yeah, the tree line on both sides. We already have some.
I just want
on this side.
it was that side.
It was on that side.
Okay, that's what I want.
So that would have to be what we would have.
Yeah, I understand. I was trying to visualize was it behind it.
I'll show you the aerial.
The one that is introduced.
That is right.
From this side.
That's it right there. Right there, okay.
It seems like there's a lot of people that have a lot of good questions, so I guess my question is, who wants to host the next meeting? What are we gonna do this?
Before we answer that question, I just wanted to ask if anybody else from the squirrels had anything they wanted to also add to this, because, you know, the big part of the other memorial area is the parking lot area that the squirrels own. So I'm just curious if anybody else from the squirrels has some first thoughts or feedback.
I just wanted to second what Ricardo was saying about the sort of small treasure trove of artifacts that we sort of inherited and have tried to respect and categorize and collate. And I think there's a lot of really fascinating stuff, and we usually exhibit some of it during Clarissa Street, but it would, in some form, probably fit in very well.
Well, I'm wondering if in the scope of this grant, I guess, from the Landmark Society, does it also include artifacts and things that are inside buildings? Because the Squirrels building used to be the old Elks Club. And I know from talking to my colleague Paulette from the Squirrels, you've done, you know, archiving and things like that of that history. And so, and I know you've created a museum almost of those things inside. They could use, I'm sure, some additional assistance and resources to really showcase those. Could that be part of, you know, of this grant?
Yeah.
Let me just clarify. You're seeing the grant. The grant is over. The grant is done. This is the end. This is the end of the project. So we're thrilled to see a group like this together that has this excitement and wants to move on with one of the aspects of what we brought up in the grant. But we're a 9-county region, and we did, you know, you're seeing 1/6 of what was in this project that we took on. If we could have a group like this in every one of those 6, we'd be thrilled, but this is exactly what we were looking for, bringing a group like this together that has interest, has the excitement, and wants to move forward. And, you know, if you folks want to continue with the process, we'd be happy to be a part of it and see where we can take it with you and where we can find additional funding.
So the group gets a great idea, they can come to you and say.
Absolutely, yeah.
And I would also say on behalf of the Cornhill Neighbors Association, we would be happy to host a general meeting for the neighborhood to continue this conversation.
What happened to Mount Olivet Baptist Church?
They were invited.
Well, I'm from Mount Olivet.
And
you got that big old lot there.
I know, and
I was skipping over that.
I called their church, I spoke with their secretary, and asked to have it announced on Sunday. Marilyn Powers called me this morning and said, is it tonight or is it Tuesday night? When I got home, I called her and I said, it's tonight. So I was hoping to see Marilyn here.
Well, I used to serve on the trustee board for Mount Olivet, so I'm aware of the lot, you know, the one we're talking about. And I'm just curious, I noticed that was omitted in the conceptual design. Is there any particular reason, you know which lot we're talking, or which
It's that other major
Yes.
green space at the corner where we showed some interventions. We did a few concepts where you saw the shot of the intersection corner that had kind of a brick facing, calling out Clarissa
Adams
Street.
and Clarissa.
Yep. And we had talked just in-house about potentially having that become a stage, just lending itself to that large open field for performances. It has a lot to offer, being a major green space. So no particular reason why it was left out. We just instead tried to focus on certain regions and explore that. Part of the study, in a really quick timeline, I think we began it in January. We were going to try to go for a second round of funding in April. Given the breadth of the study, we had to really focus on certain areas, knowing that, again, it's conceptual. Here were our areas that we'd recommend. Moving forward, if that area lended itself better, then let's say where we showed it next to the flying squirrel. I mean, that stuff's all open. There's no specific reason why that wasn't chosen for any.
I just wanted to also add, Marilyn and representatives from Mount Olivet were at our last meeting in November, where this was shown.
Yeah, I know Marilyn.
Yeah, so they have seen it.
Okay.
couple recommendations we're going to close out. Number one is, anytime you get a group like this and they say a conceptual idea, a lot of things come up and we try to solve the problem right here and there. Okay? We don't even have a coordinated group as of yet. We don't have someone who, I think Ron is going to have that responsibility, the initial responsibility. Our role, primary role here was to get the churches involved from the initial concept. What I would recommend to the church representatives, you will have a link. The gentleman back there is going to have all your names and your emails. It's going to send you a link. I would say that needs to be presented to your churches, okay? Let them have their feedback, because we know small group of people can say, yeah, this is a great idea. You take it to the Lord about it, and they say, no way. So you need to get that consent. That's what I'm going to be doing with our church. We have about 6 people here from our church that is here, and that's not representative of a 300-some church, okay? Again, I'm primarily talking about our church and what we have seen conceptually, okay? And anytime you have an effort like there are restraining forces that you may not be aware of, we've talked about our easement that would have to be addressed. I'm sure Mount Olive would have some things that would have to be addressed with that land that they're leasing, okay? So the other bodies here, I don't know, how many, what's the populace that you're representing, but I would say you would need to do the same thing. You would need to go back to your groups, show them, and take it from there. I think the other main thing that we need to do tonight is to talk with Ron here and say, who has an interest to take this forward, and then when we get back together. And again, I thank everybody for coming, and I think this was more than a turnout. This was a greater turnout than we think. I counted about 30 people here. And we really appreciate your comments.
I have my cards too, if anyone wants them.
And before we disperse, I think we need to decide how we're going to then get back together.
It's fair to say, for now, we'll be the center point person. If somebody else on Clarissa Street says, hey, we should be the one running with that ball, that's great. We'll support everything we can.
When we got the study, I sent it right off to our vision plan committee, because I knew that for the CHNA, that was the group that was working on this kind of thing. But they've got a lot of other things as well, and now we've got groups together. And I want to get this gentleman's email before he leaves, so that I can get those jazz.
So I would say we will definitely take the point position for now, but let's face it, I did not grow up on Clarissa Street. This is not my place.
Oh, we definitely can recommend people to be a part
Yeah,
of
there
that.
you go. That's what it comes down to.
Okay.
So did you want to
Set a time for the next meeting?
Boy, I wish I could just pull one out that quick. All right, so we're all going to see an email here pretty soon, right?
Yes.
All right,
Do
then.
you have everyone's contact information?
Yeah, I
We're going to have
Papers going around.
So then I think off of that email,
Sure, yeah, some of that.
off of that email, we'll send out a blast to everybody and try and start setting up. So off of the email that we received, the link, you can set this, we'll send out an email. Hopefully everybody's available.